Hello, Andrew. Thank you for joining me today. It's a
Hello,
pleasure.
Max.
So today's video recording is dedicated to introducing not only ecohumanism research, which is my website, but also for presenting the work of Mr. Johnson, who's the owner and developer of checktheevidence.com, including the CV pandemic investigation. So the purpose of this video slash presentation slash discussion, well, as I've just suggested, it's to have a general discussion. I'm going to make sure that it's not styled in the form of an interview, but rather to be more free and in its format. Because of course, for those of you who know me, which is probably going to be, you're going to be in the minority because of course, I'm new. First of all, I'll give you a brief introduction as to who I am. So my name is Max Barker. I am a prospective student. I have a degree in geography, including a certificate in permaculture design. I graduated from a university in Canada, and I will be pursuing graduate studies this year. So I developed ecohumanism research primarily because it's actually a combination of personal experiences that date back to when I was a child, including independent research that I've conducted since approximately the time when I began my university studies, which was in 2016. So ecohumanism, very simply defined, is a holistic philosophy that is based upon ecological theory. So it's about helping humans to attain a way of life that is more human than the humanist philosophy that's already in existence. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with humanism, it's a philosophy and that it's a way of life. So it's a way of life that has been in existence for thousands of years, and basically, and it involves encouraging to bringing out the best in people. So to encourage human survival, well-being, basically, it's a bit like what we would call common sense. That's what humanism is. It's common sense. You do things so that way you can survive and to experience happiness. So with that said, I will briefly show you a little bit about my website, but I will not do so in any detail. Instead, I will save this for another video because this is not the primary purpose of this discussion. So now we shall share the screen. Okay, so here's the website. So here we have the home page. Of course, this is the home page that I am on right now. The About section briefly describes what the website is about, including its philosophy. The website also has a blog section where you can read about announcements and articles, one of which is featured right here. This one happens to have the title of the COVID-19 pandemic, a scientific and political problem. The reason why I am showing this one in particular is because Andrew has posted it on his website, CV Pandemic Investigation. And well, as the title suggests, I briefly describe some of the main problems surrounding conventional theory about the pandemic with respects to, well, it's scientific justification, which, as I argue, there is none. And this is something that we will briefly discuss during this video. So with that said, this web page, well, it's actually a section that has a web page called Papers. In this section, you'll discover that I publish several papers, none of which are peer-reviewed, but that I've personally taken the time to research and to review myself. I have proofread them at least 10 times, but in the future, I will consider inviting people. Of course, if you're a member of the audience and you're interested in for offering help for reviews, then I would appreciate that because I'm always looking to improve, and that's that. So here we have the Learn webpage. This is comprised of some books that I have found not only beneficial but essential to developing the vision for ecohumanism. So if you want to learn more about the website and its philosophy, I would suggest that you click on this webpage and to review the list of books that it contains. If you wish to contact me for more information, you may click here. Or alternatively, Ecohumanism Research has social media. So you can click here for Facebook, here for LinkedIn, or here for Twitter, depending on what your preferences are. So with that said, I shall scroll up and give it over to Andrew Johnson, who has checktheevidence.com.
Okay, yes,
Okay.
Thank you for that introduction, Max, and I'm glad that you're doing the website. And I think, you know, what's worth commenting a little bit is how we sort of came into contact. And I think we have a similar philosophy, and I think you express very well, you know, the alleged pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. You express in that very well, I think, the sort of some of the core ideas that have kind of brought us together, really, in that we both appreciate the value of a kind of a scientific approach, for want of a better term, to a topic, in that we, you know, we want to gather evidence, we want to study that evidence and draw certain conclusions. And I think we've both realized that, particularly and especially with the COVID-19, there are types of evidence which have either been discarded or ignored or covered up or downplayed. And that is part and parcel of this whole philosophy that, you know, I think you're expressing with the ecohumanism, in terms of getting a fairer hearing for all of the evidence in a given topic of study, and trying to be even-handed the study of that evidence, and removing any biases which can be caused both by being part of an academic establishment, for example, or having to dress up research so that it can be published in a noted or recognized scientific journal, or
that's right.
You know, this situation where much of this evidence and study that is used in the COVID-19 pandemic is funded and promoted by large corporations, you know, and sometimes that's fairly obvious, and sometimes it's quite subtle, you know, and then you know, they work through charitable foundations and things like this, which can disguise some of the real sources of this. And so these themes, I think, are what have brought us together. And you realized, I think, sometime in your studies, that hang on, you know, there's a few things going on here, you know, which these things aren't really being talked about enough in where they should be being talked about. In other words, in an academic sphere, you know, these topics, these discussions that should be taking place among academics are just not taking place. And people that try to start these discussions are often sidelined, you know, and lambasted, ridiculed, even, you know, cast aside, basically, in various ways, their fans. So I think this idea of bringing out the best in people is to kind of see if we can do anything to stop that from happening, that everyone is given a fair hearing, and then at the end of that, we have a better set of evidence that can be more, you know, evenly judged, and out of that we can then create a fairer, a more equitable world where everyone has an opportunity to, you know, do research, those conclusions honestly, openly, fairly, and not be sidelined, but, you know, because those conclusions are uncomfortable for certain groups of people or certain interests, you know, or are too revealing for those interests. So that, you know, correct me if I'm wrong on any of that, but my understanding is that that's what's behind, you know, that's what's forming much of your motivation for starting your website. I mean, that's my feeling of from what you've told me.
Yes, what you said is I agree with, and you're correct with regards to my motivations. Well, that was actually one of them. Another motivation is because I've always felt that there is something not quite right with the way science is being portrayed, and the fact that politics seems to be heading in one direction, whereas science and technology are heading in another. So what I've been noticing, not just through my own experience, but through research as well, is that politics is going like this. You know, I think we could describe it as a form of tunnel vision, whereby you're just having to focus on your own interest, including those of your party, who's representing you, that is. And on the other hand, science and technology is going in a completely different direction, it seems, towards liberating humans from the drudgery of persistent, continuous, and arduous labor, which I'm not sure about you, but I think you'll probably agree with me if we say that that's a great thing, because here we are today, right? I have a microphone, I have a laptop, same with you. We're able to converse using science and technology that is beyond our understanding, if we're being honest with ourselves. Of course, we can physically interact with it, such as me being able to wave at the screen like this, looking like a, you name it. But of course, the purpose of mentioning this is that, as you've already pointed out, there's a major discrepancy. So the question is, what is that discrepancy? What's it about? What's going on? What's with the deception, as you suggested before? And now that I just mentioned deception, it makes me think I had a question for you. And that question was, bearing in mind that this is the first time I am recording a video and presenting myself, and also bearing in mind that my audience is minimal for obvious reasons, what is alternative knowledge in the way that you describe it on your website?
Yeah, so this really is one of the key factors that we're talking about, is this idea that we've come to call alternative knowledge, and it harkens back to, you know, what we were discussing, or what I was saying in the last few minutes, in that certain topics are very rarely properly discussed in an academic sphere by scientists. I'm not going to go into the details here because there's lots and lots of videos of me talking about this, but one of my main areas of interest and research has been what really happened on 9/11. And again, without going into the details, if you look at the standard sort of academic and scientific position on that, you know, it's basically that a group of hijackers, you know, hijacked planes, and they then did a surprise attack on the US. They crashed the planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, caused a lot of damage. The towers burned down, and terrible thing. And it wasn't what Al Qaeda did horrible, you know, and they are actually motivated by religious fundamentalism because they hate the decadence of Western democracies, and so they feel that there should be a clamp down on that, and have a more Muslim, you know, Islamic outlook would stop all this decadence. You know, that's the kind of subtext of all of that. And when you actually look at the evidence of what happened, and I'm just going to throw in her website, and you actually look at what actually happened, you then get an alternative set of knowledge which isn't discussed anywhere in any university paper. You know, you can go into any scientific journal, you know, for example, anywhere on the planet, and you will not find a paper about how the towers turned to dust before they hit the ground. You'll find that independently on other websites, such as Dr. Woods and one or two others, but you won't find that in any academic forum. So that's why I call it true that the towers did turn to dust before they hit the ground. But you can't find that proof in a scientific journal that would, you know, publish articles about quantum mechanics, or, you know, certain weird building fires, or earthquake damage to a building. You can't find anything which discusses how the World Trade Center towers disappeared in a scientific journal. So, you know, that's really what would like, both Max and I think we would like to see, that, you know, somebody like Dr. person that's like, for example, some of the people that Max quote in the article about the COVID-19 pandemic, they wouldn't get their material published in a recognized scientific journal. If they wrote a scientific paper to the same standards that one was written about, say, climate change, or the changes in the desert landscape of Africa or something, and that you couldn't get that published, in any scientific currently. It would just be blocked, etc. So we want that to end.
Yes.
People, who are publishing that sort of information that really challenges some of the fundamental assumptions we have about the way that the world works. We want that to be viewable to as wide an audience as possible without censorship, and for people to be able to evaluate that information on their own terms, and not be influenced by vested interests, like be they academic or commercial.
Right. So since you mentioned that the kind of research that Dr. Wood has published has not been featured in any other journal, well, explain to me, and not just to me, but for the sake of the audience, because of course I'm assuming not everyone is going to be your audience that that they've subscribed to you. So I just want to make sure that we're introducing ourselves properly for people who are new to this. So from your experience and from your research, what are the factors that are leading to this kind of, I'm not sure how to say it, shall we say ignorance, or just a lack of awareness, of this kind of research? So explain in particular the case of Dr. Wood, so that way people can learn more about it, because as you've pointed out, and as I've noticed too, it certainly seems to be something that is relatively unknown in comparison to the conventional theories of, regardless of whether we're talking about the NIST reports, which is the National Institutes for Science and Technology, including the research conducted by the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth.
I think if you watch Dr. Wood's presentation, particularly the one that she did in 2012 at the Breakthrough Energy Movement conference, which was an independent conference, it wasn't organized by a university or an academic body of any kind. So the basic problem is with a lot of the alternative knowledge topics that we study is when you get to some of the core issues and the core evidence, things are real. The problem is that it erodes the foundation on which much of the academic and commercial establishments are built. Like, for example, if you study what Dr. Wood uncovered, it has vast implications for the way that energy is produced and used in the world. And you see that you can only explain the destruction of the towers as being an unusual manifestation of energy. Does not come from burning jet fuel, for example, which the official story claims, and it's not come from the planting of bombs, which is what the alternative architects and engineers theories claim, and it's not come from them. It's come from somewhere else. It's come from an unacknowledged source, and therefore people will ask, well, how is this be? How can this be? Who put this there? How did they do it? Who's done it? How does it work? And because we can't answer every single one of those, this conclusion must be wrong then, because you don't know how that conclusion can have actually come about. Therefore, what your original statements about the evidence, they must be false. So you get into situations like that with alternative knowledge, where you study a certain topic, you gather certain evidence, and you draw certain conclusions, but they are so far removed from what you've read elsewhere that the establishment can't cope with that, and their only thing they can do is censor you. They can't give you an open platform, because if they did, it would undermine much of the other research that they have published for the last 100 and odd years, and you can apply that. You can give examples about that, not just to do with 9/11. You can give examples from like free energy research, where people appear to have produced devices which run with no fuel. You can also give examples from people that at an aggressive stage, they've used an alternative therapy. There's that word alternative again, and they've completely cured themselves. And then the doctors will say, well, that you've just had a spontaneous remission, because that's not possible to cure cancer, in that way.
Right.
You just can't do it. So you're getting that across the board, as I say, with health, with 9/11, with energy, even things like nuclear power. You have things like the electric universe theory, which contradicts the Bang, and all that comes from that. And the way that we evolved, for example, that's another big one. Darwinian evolution is the dominant sort of paradigm. Once you begin to study the evidence, for example, compare dolphins to humans, compare chimpanzees to humans, you can quickly see that there are great problems in statements where Darwinists will say that human beings evolved from chimpanzees, or they are our closest living relative. That's just not completely true. Anyway, put it that way. That it's much more complicated than that. And
Yes.
I think that's another thing, if I can just bring in the complexity that you get into. That, of course, becomes a big challenge for many people. And I think it's also, and I think you yourself will already, I think, agree with me that when you start to look at the various bits of evidence about, say, 9/11 or health, you start looking into fields where you don't have expertise. You don't really have a lot of expertise. My degree was in computer science and physics. So, I don't know anything, or I shouldn't know anything about, health care. I shouldn't know anything about how cancer can be treated, but I do. I've read things. And we're in a new world now compared to that of 25 years ago, where we can access all these scientific journals, particularly if, like me, I'm a tutor for the Open University. So I have got access to 70,000 scientific journals if I want them, just because I've got a tutor's login, and that gives me free access to that information if I so choose. And that's not been possible up until, about 10, 15 years ago, really, in this sort of thing. So we have got access now to much more knowledge. And therefore, this idea of ecohumanism, one should be encouraged to study more and look at different sources of information outside of these standard gatekeepers, such as the scientific journal, such as the mainstream media, rise certain research and certain researchers as not worthy of attention for various reasons. And if you're reading something where a person is character assassinated, or said, they're an idiot, or they're no good, or their research is unreliable, or something like that, or this person is a quack, then do a bit more. Why are they a quack? Why is their research unreliable? Has this person saying the research is unreliable been able to give examples of where this person's research is wrong? Clearly what's wrong, and prove what's wrong. And are you happy with that critique? I think that's the sort of mentality we're trying to encourage.
Yes, what you mentioned just now, I would emphasize that, especially because what you're saying right now, the way I see it, it's very closely related to borderline between philosophy and psychology. So that is to say, phenomenology, ontology. So more specifically, what I'm referring to by using this technical jargon is basically self-awareness and self-understanding. And what I like about you, Andrew, without meaning to make ourselves seem grander or greater than we appear, right? I mean, I don't mean to self-aggrandize ourselves, but if we're being objective about our own awareness and our knowledge, to have this ability to think critically and logically, which forms the basis of all science, of course, that does require a basic level as well of self-awareness. And if you need any scientific confirmation of that, then I would kindly suggest you research it for yourself. Just simply go to Google Scholar and type in self-awareness, philosophy, self-understanding, phenomenology, and you'll see how philosophers have discussed these aspects of what it means to be human and how it correlates closely to attaining meaning in life. Now, this concept of meaning is not just as simple as going to a website that you discovered and agreeing just because it happens to have knowledge that seems different, right? I mean, you could find many different websites that appear to be alternative, that seem to promote a different way of thinking, but that are not necessarily consistent in their logic or in the way they show their evidence. And I think on your website, Andrew, and the reason why I'm saying what I like about your website is that you do just that. You avoid the mistakes that some websites have made, because the way I see it is that you seem to have better awareness an understanding of what your own knowledge is, including the limits to your knowledge, which I would argue is just as important, if not even more important, than just what you know. And this seems to define the difference between the researchers that are able to expose certain kinds of deceptions, as you have done with regards to 9/11, climate change, evolution, well, the debate between evolution and creationism, because you go into those into detail, but you're consistent. Whereas other people, they don't seem to be able to do that. Now, of course, examples of such websites, feel free to name them. I'm sure you know more than I do. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I was talking about this with my partner, this sort of idea of, an academic type or an academic person, somebody with a PhD who's done maybe a science degree or something similar, running a website like you or I have created. There aren't many of them. And one that came to mind was, I think he's a chap called Michael Chuzadovsky. I think he has got some academic qualifications, and I think it might be something like political science. But if you go and look at that, the global.research.ca, it's a much bigger website than mine. It's much better organized, and it's got thousands and thousands of articles by different authors. I think I've only got about 3 or 4 different authors, maybe, I don't know, 10 different authors, not that many anyway. And I just run it myself. My website, it's a solo effort with contributions from people like Max when they choose to say. Chuzadovsky, for example, if you go onto his website, you'll find articles about 9/11 and, disagreeing with the official narrative that's put out by the mainstream, or the shame stream, as I now call it. And, but you won't find stuff about Dr. Judy Wood. And this always puzzles me because, Dr. Judy Wood's material is scientifically based. She's taken it to court and stuff, or a proportion of it and whatnot. And that's all on record. Yet, like Engineers for 9/11 Truth and a few others, they don't cover it. They don't give it the merit that it deserves. And again, I won't go into that, but it harkens back to this being self-aware as well, because that's part of this, and being aware of your own limitations, but also being confident in certain of your conclusions to the point where you can demonstrate the correctness of these conclusions to somebody else, whilst at the same time, or augmentations, and being open to the situation that you may have believed that something was true for a long time, a large proportion of your life. And I say this even now about Dr. Judy Wood's material. If somebody can show me where it's wrong and the conclusions that I would state from that, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear that about any the other topics we've talked about as well, the energy issues or the health issues. If somebody can show me where, I'd love to hear it. And my attitude is like one of a tutor, and I've said this a few times. A student sends me a piece of work. Sometimes it's really good. I put a few comments on it. Sometimes it's really quite weak, and I have to put a lot of comment on it. But the end objective is that is to improve the student's work, to improve the student's understanding, to improve the overall quality of the work, make it better, and improve, have a positive contribution to the world. And I'd also at that point like to say that I remember one about the COVID-19 pandemic. And you very kindly, you did a critique of it. And I was very pleased that you did that, because, I'm much older than you, but you felt confident that you could make a positive contribution to what I'd done and improve it. And you were right. You made some good suggestions, and I implemented those suggestions at the time, because I was objective enough to say, well, what's this chap saying to me? Has he got a point? And you did have a point. So it didn't really matter, that our age difference. You at that point made a positive contribution to what I was trying to do, and that, I suppose, harkens back to the philosophy we want to encourage, where you can have an open dialogue, you can have a reasoned argument with somebody, you can point out where their work is either wrong or it can be improved without any ramifications, without the fear of reprisals or backlash or censorship or whatever it is. And I think that, if you're aware of others, then you're much better equipped to go through that process and be successful in have a successful outcome, So again, I think that ties into the philosophy that we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. And with the limited time we have left, I'd also like to say that not only do we want to encourage this, because well, of course, I think what I need to say too is that it is easier for us, I think, to be able to have such discussions precisely because we are motivated, we are driven by what we do. So there's no one there to encourage us or to push us in any direction. There's no one funding us. We're entirely self-funded. And I mean, I'm self-funded too, and I'm only a student, but I make do with whatever finance I have. So of course, as with Andrew, our websites are open to any kind of discussion and to any kind of help that we can receive because we are dependent upon it just as much as you're dependent on us to give you information that might be valuable to you. So with that said, the second thing I wanted to mention is that, again, with reference to ecohumanism, is that we are both, I would say that Andrew is an ecohumanist to the extent that he's trying to encourage the awareness. And the same applies to me. Although I can't say that we are eco-humanists, at least not in a pragmatic sense, because we are not living in a system that encourages the kind of way of thinking or even the behavior that you would expect of someone who is truly ecological. I mean, no matter what we do, we're still dependent upon vehicles that are fueled by what we call fossil fuels. Again, that's a concept that Andrew discusses in his book, Climate Change and Global Warming Exposed, which is a problematic concept. So I won't say any more on that, but if you want to read more about it, you can read his book. But essentially what we're trying to encourage people is to be able to see complexity, to understand it, and to try and be able to not think in binary terms. Binary terms in terms of either or logic, because what a mistake that people tend to do is they think, well, this website is alternative, therefore must be correct. There's nothing wrong with it. It's factual. It's on the good side, you know, it's supporting the public, but it's not necessarily true. I mean, some of these websites could be AstroTurf. AstroTurf meaning that they are funded by certain vested interests, right? So therefore their information might not be entirely accurate. So these AstroTurf websites, they could be nonprofits, as are our websites. Our websites are nonprofit, but what distinguishes us, and again, you can verify this for yourselves, is that we are, as I said, self-funded, self-motivated, and we're more than happy to answer any questions you have. And well, how does this tie into complexity? Well, what I think is worth pointing out is that the future of our world today is complexity, right? So if you think not just in terms of the natural sciences, in terms of physics, chemistry, biology, geology, but I'm also talking about the social sciences and humanities, right? So therefore, psychology, sociology, economics, politics, our world is becoming increasingly complex. So in an eco-humanist sense, if you pay attention around you and look outside, you'll notice, perhaps more easily than others, that you live in a city. Maybe it's a town, maybe it's a village, doesn't matter. The point I'm making is the human species, us, we are growing, we're evolving. And as we do so, as our science and our technology, including our way of thinking, is becoming increasingly multipolar, increasingly diverse and complex. So the reason why I'm saying that the future is complexity is that we need to be able to think and behave not just like physicists or chemists, but as geographers, whereby we're taking into account all of the different perspectives that I just listed that are in the natural and social sciences and the humanities. And this, I would argue, is not only our destiny, the way things are happening right now, but it's also something that we need to challenge ourselves to doing. So incidentally, this is part of the reason why I've pursued a degree in geography, because I realized that insofar as the sciences are useful, whether it be physics, chemistry, and biology, which are natural sciences, the ones that are the most objective of all. Well, in the past, in the 20th century, this may have been appropriate, but nowadays, where we need to include the human factor into everything we do in terms of engineering and design, I would argue that it is no longer appropriate for us to just study one discipline, although of course you're free to do so, but just bearing in mind that as with Andrew, Andrew has mentioned that he studied many other disciplines because in spite of him having a degree in physics and having what seems to be a very thorough understanding of certain subject matters, of which you can read all about on his website, it's simply not enough to just think in one direction, regardless of whether it's physics or sociology. I mean, if you want to pursue any of those subjects, that's fine, but just remember that the world is complex, to put it simply, and it requires us to change the way we think. So, Andrew, is there anything you'd like to add before we run out of time?
Yes, I agree with all of that, Max. And I think a couple of themes which, I'll mention is that, I've come to the conclusion in doing a lot of research on various topics, such as a few of the ones you've mentioned and others we haven't, that there is, another set of interests which basically are negative, or evil, whichever word you want to use. They are working against the sorts of ideas discussing on openness. They don't want freedom. They don't want to have people looking at different views and drawing their own conclusions. They want to impose their view and shut down discussion of any other views which challenge those. That, in other words, their philosophy is pretty much, 180 degrees opposite to us. And so if that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't have a reason for doing what we do, so you get into this duality again and everything, right? So I think that you become aware of that when you've been doing this for a certain period of time, that there is another group operating, which is, promoting darker ways of doing things or oppressive ways of doing things, and they seem to be in the driving seat for much of the world at the moment. But the fact that you and I, as you said earlier on, are having this conversation proves their control and their ability. Yeah, so we're just talking about really, that got cut off there because we're using this free Zoom account, but it's only limited to 40 minutes. So it's this idea that there are people working against us, accept, but that's the conclusion I've come to, and nobody's been able to prove that wrong to my satisfaction, because if there weren't people working against us and we had all this information out in the open and being discussed on BBC, ITV, Sky, CNN, and all of that, we wouldn't need to be here doing this right now. So that to me is a kind of an obvious thing, and that's what motivates me. I'm motivated by finding the truth about something, making people more free, giving them more choice here on Earth, but being able to travel away from there if they wanted to do that. That's the sort of areas that I've been looking into, and I'm very unhappy that people are not being told the truth about so many things.
Likewise, Andrew, thank you for that. I can sympathize. It makes me unhappy, but at the same time, what I tell people who get angry or frustrated or distressed in any shape or manner about these topics is that focus on life, right? You have one life to live, as far as we know, and make the most of it. Instead of seeing this as something that's negative, instead look at it as a challenge. Of course, for those people that are being severely affected by the changes that we're going through, regardless of whether it's the COVID-19 pandemic or 9/11 or the political agenda behind climate change, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. At the end of the day, just as is the case with me and you, we are living on a planet that we call Earth. And in my view, as someone who aspires to embody ecohumanism, I think it's a gift. So, don't forget to laugh, to smile, to appreciate the things that you have. But in order to be balanced, don't forget to be critical and logical either. But because after all, I think that's part of the fun or the pleasure of doing the kind of research that you may be doing, assuming that you're an audience and you're watching this and you're wishing to learn more about the topics we're learning about. So with that said, bearing in mind again, I'm going to repeat myself just to make sure that it's clear. This is my first time recording a video, so please do at least forgive me if I make some mistakes or if I say things that you didn't like, or for any other disruptions they may have encountered, for instance, audio visual. So with that said, I would like to thank you, Andrew, for joining me today. So this is Andrew Johnson from checktheevidence.com, and I am Max Barker, owner of Ecohumanismresearch.com. Thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for taking the time.